The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, I'm Jack Cole, and welcome to a discussion with Thomas More, author of Soulmates, as our guest today, and his book is subtitled Honoring the Mysteries of Love and Relationship. In 1992, his book Care of the Soul, which is a guide for cultivating depth and sacredness in everyday life, was on the New York Times bestseller list for 44 weeks. Because it's a kind of book that spreads from person to person and word of mouth. I know I saw an ad for your book, and then got it from the library. And in reading the first chapter, I knew I had to get my own copy because I wanted to underline points and go back and reflect. And so I think that's part of the reason for the success of your book. His companion book to Soulmates is called, his companion book to Care of the Soul is called Soulmates. And it speaks to, and I think has some valuable lessons for anyone who's ever worried about a fading or lost relationship, a splintered family, or an alienated community. He takes a reader through the initiation rite of new pleasure and difficulty. Thomas More is a psychotherapist, a theologian, and art historian whose message is that as we honor the mysterious ways in which our souls guide our relationships, we'll be able to undergo the changes that relationship must undergo. Tom, you use the word soul in both the titles of both of your books. And in reflecting, we use soul a lot in our everyday language. You know, it's good for your soul. He's my soul brother, she's my soul sister, we're going to have a soul meal. That's a soul-searching question. That company is heartless. It doesn't have any soul. What do you mean when you use the title soul in each of these two books?
I mean pretty much what you were just saying, the common sense, intuitive sense of what a soul is. If we try to define too much and go into history and argue about theological and philosophical positions and all of that, I think we lose what I'm after. What I'm after is that sense. I'll tell you, in my neighborhood, there's a store that says that they sell food for the body and flowers for the soul. And I like to keep that in mind because that's the soul really that I'm talking about. It can't be defined. I think that everybody knows pretty much what that is. I doubt if anyone walks into that store and says, please define what you mean. I think we know what we mean, and that's really what I'm talking about.
Is it something that comes from within? The soul is?
Yes, I pretty much follow, now here I'm going to do just the opposite of what I just said, to talk about the traditions about soul, but I follow the tradition that goes all the way back to the Greeks. Heraclitus in the 6th century BC talked about soul, and he described it in terms of depth. And I'm very interested in that lower, deeper dimension of what it means to be a human being and what it means to be a community. Or even to have work that has this depth, or to have a home that has the depth, or even things, talking about the depth of the things. I like to go back to that idea of so long ago. It emphasizes depth. Now I think that a lot of our talk about soul, or if we don't use that word, about psychology or whatever, tends to move toward another direction, toward the height, or toward the future, trying to make things better. I want to find out what's deep, deep within, whatever it is we're dealing with.
One of the characteristics that you mentioned is being intimate with a person. Can you expand on that? Beyond the limited use that so many people use today, I was intimate with that person, means they had sexual relationship, which may not be intimate at all.
Right, exactly.
So how are we intimate with other people?
Well, you know, in my book Soulmates, I start that discussion of intimacy with the word. Intimate, it comes from a very beautiful Latin word, intima, which means the deepest within. You know, the deepest within you can get. So again, we have this depth idea, and within, going inside, going into something, instead of asking, how a thing works. I think usually what we do is we go in, but we don't go in very far. We want to know how things work. I think we tend to think structurally, and we think mechanically, even about human experiences, and even about relationships. Now, I think if we push that further past the structural questions, of who's connected to whom and what happened in your childhood and all those things, we press even further to the very deep issues. Who are you as a person? What about the mysterious elements within a person that even the individual himself or herself doesn't know about? I think that's moving then close into the intimate levels of the individual. So then a relationship is intimate when the deeper parts of the people are engaged, are involved in the relationship. Now, it may seem, sometimes you might think that certain structures are just set up for that kind of intimate relationship, like a marriage or a family. But often you don't sense that intimacy. On the other hand, you may feel that with somebody you're just meeting on a train.
Can be a short-term kind of...
It can be very short-term, I think, yeah. And especially, it may not be that the relationship itself between these two people feels so deep, but that being touched by somebody, you just meet quickly and in passing, that encounter may stay with you at a very deep level for the rest of your life, or at least for a few years or months. And that, I think, indicates its intimacy.
So I can have an aha experience. On a short term or a long term?
Or long term. And I would say the same about so-called failed relationships. Just because they don't work out doesn't mean that they don't have a very intimate place within your own heart and memory.
You're visiting the state of Minnesota today, and that's sometimes called the state of recovery, because we are very proud of the 12-step groups we have, the support groups we have, and I notice in your book, you have some distaste for those ideas and languages that's much in vogue among people who want to talk about improving our relationships. You don't like the word, quote, dysfunctional families, unquote. What's wrong or what's lacking in using and emphasizing that approach?
Well, there are a couple things wrong. One is that the word itself is mechanical. I don't think people are dysfunctional. Machines are dysfunctional. It goes back to what I just was saying about a mechanical view of human relationships. We talk about things functioning. I don't think we're really talking about human beings who feel and have passion and have fears and joy and all these things. I don't think we would talk about these issues as functions, really. Although, there's a very old basis, I guess, for using the word function, but even in the old days, I'm talking about 1,000 years ago, the word function really didn't mean working mechanically. It meant more the way the body's organs enjoy themselves, or not work, not that labor view, but that they are part of the community of the body. And so in that sense...
The interconnectedness.
The interconnectedness of them, yeah, yes. Exactly. So that would be okay for me. I mean, judging these things.
Yes.
The second problem I have with calling families dysfunctional is that I think what we do is pathologize in the bad sense of the word. I think psychology has done this a lot, and psychologists do this unwittingly sometimes, where they pathologize people or families. What I mean is we make people feel sick. We think of families as sick. Imagine if you look at your family and you think, well, my family's dysfunctional. It's not a very, appreciative way of looking at family. And even families that have a great deal of trouble, and I've worked with people who come from incredibly abusive families, I still think we don't have to call them dysfunctional. That pathologizes too much. I think we really need to realize that a family is a sacred entity. It's a mysterious entity.
You call it the nest of the soul, as I recall.
It's the nest. It's one of the maybe the important nest of the soul. That which holds forever. It gives you a place to be. I think it has a lot to do with a feeling throughout our adult lives of feeling at home, a feeling of belonging and accepted. I mean, that's not a new thing to say, obviously, but I think that to honor that, to realize how much the soul needs this, and then to go and look at the family as if it were some kind of construction that can either function or not function, or we're going to have to somehow dismiss it because it wasn't functional. We're losing something very important.
And sometimes I think people fall in the trap of saying, well, it's working okay now, so we don't need to change anything. And your message in both books are the continual change in relationships.
Yes, so the relationships are always changing. And not because people are trying to change or intentionally change them, but I think just because, if I may go back once more to my friend Heraclitus, way back when, he said too that, that the soul is its own source of movement. In other words, things happen in us that we don't have to explain in terms of the life around us, our families, or what's happening in society or whatever, but each of us has a dynamic soul that has its own movement. It may be forward movement and it may be regressive movement. I'm not saying it's always going ahead, but it's generally moving, and that kind of movement is something I think that it would be good to recall in our relationships, because then we might expect that the person we're very close to is not always going to be the same.
You spoke about some of the mythology, and I know in Care of the Soul, your explanation of Narcissus, the story of Narcissus, was strong to me. Where can we learn about these besides Greek mythology? Are there other sources that we can turn to some sacred stories that? What cultures? Where can I turn to find out some of these stories?
Well, I think you can turn to, first of all, to the sources of that you like. I mean, if you like folk songs, that's a good place. If you like pop music, that's a place to go. One place I like to go is I look at my own ancestry. Now, my great-grandparents came from Ireland, so I listen to a lot of Irish music, and I read stories from Ireland. And I do that simply because those are my roots.
So some of those are the twigs that went into the nest of your family.
Yes, exactly, right. See, the family is there again, but I don't take it just as those people in that structure, but I have that whole
the culture,
that whole cultural past, and it's full of mystery. And I think the connection. See, what I'm trying to say, it's difficult to express. What I'm trying to say is that instead of looking around for the best stories, one way to do it is say, where do I come from? Where does my family come from? And go to those stories first, or at least among the most important. Another thing I do that's kind of odd, I think, it's kind of strange, is that I quote authors who live near me, or who did live near me. I'm quoting Emily Dickinson a lot. She comes up quite a bit in Soulmates. Now, she lived in the house that I pass every day. When I have to go to the store. We have no stores where I live, so I have to come from my house in the woods and go down to town, and I pass her house every single day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Emerson I also quote. Emerson used to lecture and speak about the soul in the very towns near where I live. And so I quote him for that reason. Not just because he had a lot of good things to say, but because he was in the neighborhood, which is also one of these nests of the soul. Now, sometimes it's also valuable to go outside of the nest and to look at someone else's background. So in Soulmates, I tell a story from the Native Americans in New Mexico, and that became, for me at least, a really central story in this book. Shall I mention the story?
Would you tell that
story?
The
story is, if I remember the details, the story is about a young woman who is a weaver, who makes tapestries and makes clothes, weaves clothes and that sort of thing. And many of the young men of her village are very interested in her then. They want to marry her and they approach her. But she's not interested in them. She's very interested in her work. But one day, Coyote, who is this great figure of the West, this great mythological figure, is drawn to her. And instead of trying to impress her directly, what he does, he goes off and he dresses in magical clothes, and he dresses magically. The story says he stamps on his feet on the ground 4 times, and then he's dressed in shoes and clothing. And then he gets black currants, and he takes them in his left hand. And he goes to town, to this village, and he dances. And she is so attracted by him dancing on these currants and his finery and his dress that she falls in love with him. And they get together, and they have children. And eventually, after a long period of time, he leads her out to this deep space hole in the ground where he lives. And the children go in, and he goes in, and she doesn't think she can get in there. But she peeks down inside, and she sees the same home, only sort of an inner home where she has lived before, and she goes into it. I think this is a wonderful, mysterious story about the mystery of marriage. I mean, I don't know what the story is about. I don't know how the people traditionally understood it, but for me, it's a story of marriage in its magical qualities, in its mystery, its religion, and so on.
So one of the positive things that Coyote did, he looked at the weaver and said, what is her soul, what is important to her and her soul, and how can I experiment or live that kind of thing too in approaching her? Would that be true?
Well, I think there's something even more mysterious in it, because, at least the way I see it, when I hear that story or read the story, I think immediately of, because I know Greek stories to some extent, I think of and other cultures too, how the story of weaving is not just about weaving material, it's about weaving together families and weaving together all of your experiences into a personality, so that weaving is one of the great metaphors, great images of both of society and of personality all around the world. So I think that really what's going on there, at least the way I hear it, is that this mythological figure who, it's like this figure from a much deeper place, if I can use that image again, a much deeper place, is drawn to the human activity of weaving together a lot of experiences into something very interesting, and it becomes attractive. You see, in a way, I think the story is about the attraction between the most mysterious elements in life, in the universe itself, and our own human activity. And I suspect that when we get married and when we have these intimate relationships, what's going on there is not just two people getting together, but in itself, this coming together of personalities is in fact a marriage of all the opposites that are in life. I mean, in a small way, but in an important way, two people are able to reconcile things like, let's say, eternity and time, or the very deepest elements of existence and ordinary human experience. Bring these together in a kind of magic.
You mentioned mysteries. Do we ever solve the mysteries in life?
Oh, they're not to be solved. Is it? No, the problems are to be solved.
Okay.
See, I think the difficulty is that we have turned the soul into a problem.
Okay.
You know, so we have all this talk about solving our problems. But if you see the soul as a mystery, you don't try to solve it. You just try to honor and respect what that is, which is the subtitle of this book.
I heard an interview last week with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and he said by the year 2000, 40% of the children born in the United States, black and white together, will be born into single-parent families. Now, what resources does a single-parent family have to look back into their culture, or if the father's unknown, or they want to cut off the father from the child? Where does that child get nurtured in?
Well, see, once again, I really don't want to see this as a problem exactly. I mean, I think we do have to deal with the problems that come up.
It's a situation that's going to exist.
It's a situation that exists now in our time, and I think it's a mistake to set up as a standard one particular structure again of what a marriage or what a family is, and say this is the only kind that works.
There are hundreds of varieties.
There are hundreds of varieties, and besides that, the notion of marriage and family is not so literal. For example, I think the soul really needs family always and everywhere, so that even when you're at work and you say there's a family spirit at your job, I think that's the real thing. It's not just a metaphor. It's the real thing. Soul needs a family sense. Now, I don't think we need always the same structure to evoke that. And in fact, when I speak about these things, sometimes single parents come to me and tell me with some gratitude that they feel that they're given a place, that they don't have to be abnormal because they're in this position.
And certainly one of the changes that at least I want to work on is bringing laws and other compliances into line with the reality of a great variety of families.
Yes, otherwise we're excluding people all over, and we set up this sentimental ideal which becomes a political issue then that can be exploited of what this romantic idea of family is, and we exclude all kinds of lives. People are living with a great deal of intensity and sincerity.
You, in today's culture, you know, in terms of men and women, at least traditionally, my experience has been that women have much more freedom to get friendships, and they do it on a more personal level, but men's friendships are often activity-based. It's a bowling team or a hunting group kind of thing, the male bonding kind of thing. Someone said the other night, well, they're out ice fishing, so they're doing their male bonding kind of thing. What kind of help is there for men particularly to go beyond the activity friendship level?
Well, I don't like to speak in gender terms very much myself. I like to focus on the individuals or the communities. And I suspect that what's going on with men in that regard is really not men as such. I suspect it's the world that men are active in.
Okay.
And in other words, I'd rather look at it this way, that the life that we have created, let's say the American style of life, makes it difficult for people who are in certain positions, which men have filled generally for a long time, to be able to have friendships. I mean, businesses do not often promote friendship on the job. They might think it's not a productive thing to do, or it's not their business. And when I speak to business groups now, and business leaders and managers, I tell them I think it's important for the soul of your workers to be able to cultivate friendships on the job. And there are ways that you could bring this into the business life and into the workplace.
Could you mention a few of those?
Sure. For example, it would be if people want to get together to talk to each other in their offices. There are some businesses where that's not allowed. You're not supposed to be able, you're not supposed to go into someone else's place and just have a chat. You're wasting time. Well, obviously, time can be wasted, but in matters of soul, there's a lot of time wasted. I mean, productivity has to include the importance of issues that are central to the soul. And that means that from another point of view, we may be wasting a little time, but I think that we make that up with morale or with a feeling that the people are doing their job, that they are satisfying themselves very profoundly. I think a lot of the trouble we have with families is it comes from the jobs that we have to do.
You've certainly handled change in your life, and this past year you've written a successful book. You also wrote Soulmates. You travel more. What changes? How has that impacted your friendships and relationships, and what guides can you give people that either travel a lot or there's a great change, a positive or a negative, because change impacts people the same almost if it's a positive or negative change. What would your ideas be on that?
Well, my experience is mostly good. I mean, I've really loved this life. I didn't ask for it. It just came to me, and I didn't expect it. I really didn't seek out this fast-paced life that I've gotten into. I do travel a great deal and talk to a lot of people. I see it, though, as a kind of almost like a call. Maybe that's a bit romantic to put it that way, but I see it as a call to me. I'd rather stay home and write music and write books and be with my family almost all the time. I'm not really a gregarious person at all. Now I find myself going out and speaking to people all over the place. So I take that as a call, as an invitation to different experiences, more experiences of life than I would have if I planned it all myself. There are difficulties that come along with that, obviously, trying to work out time, being able to be home with my family enough and still be on the road. But I think that with some effort and taking maybe a year or two to work that out, I feel okay about it generally. I'm always trying to deal with that issue, but that's part of life, isn't it? We're always trying to find where this goes and where that goes, and you get some new major change, and you have to make those adjustments over a long period of time.
One of the chapters in Soulmates deals with friendships and letters. Can you talk about letters? Because that's disappearing so much today with faxes and voicemail and those kinds of things. What's the benefit of that, or how can we recapture some of that?
Well, part of caring for the soul means to slow down. It just can't be done quickly. I'm not saying that all our fast work is not soulful. I don't mean that at all, but that we have to give place, I think, to the slow pace, to stopping, to getting stuck, to taking time with things. And there's something about writing letters. I didn't invent this thing. I don't know what it is about it, but there's something about writing letters that allows us to communicate from a place in our hearts and our imaginations, I think, that we can't communicate from in any other way. It's not the same to make a phone call to somebody or to send a fax. it's not that the factors aren't also valuable, even for the soul point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had many people lately telling me that the interoffice memos and email and all that
Yes.
can be full of humor, or
Okay.
the relationships are improved by them.
And I think some people have established relationships through computer network.
Absolutely.
They can be free. They don't actually, perhaps never meet the person they're typing messages
That's right.
to.
But there are dangers in that to the soul. The
okay.
soul can be wounded in those things.
How?
Because of their speed, because of the distance, telecommunications, I say this in the book too,
Mm-hmm.
distant relations, distant communicating, you know.
Yes.
There may be a wounding of intimacy at some level there. There's something to be said for sitting down with a pen, writing a letter, taking time, choosing your words carefully, making sure you have enough room to do it. All of those factors make letter writing still important, it seems to me, and if we lose it entirely, we're in trouble.
Yes, that was true in our family. A few years ago, we all sat down and wrote memories of a Christmas, one of our daughters. And then she collected them and gave them to the rest of the family as a gift. So that really we were able to celebrate from the 6 different, 4 children, and my wife and I, on that. And that was a real meaningful experience.
That's wonderful. Now, you know, I tend to glorify things a little bit now. I would see this as creating your own scripture, you know, whatever that means. Like,
okay.
You know, like we have our own sacred texts around, and they don't have to be from a particular religious tradition or anything, but this is where spirituality can enter our lives too.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned in Soulmates reading the letters of Keats.
Yes.
Are there other letters that are meaningful to you, and why did you read? What did you gain from reading letters of Keats?
Well, I like reading letters in many cases rather than reading poetry, if I can say that, in a library. The letters of Keats say something that his poetry doesn't. They say it in ways that it doesn't. I think these letters are just powerful. The same with the letters of Emily Dickinson that I quote in my writing quite a bit. Her letters they have poems in them, but they also have just communications. And her letters are a bit crazy almost. They're so dense and coming from a place within her that's not terribly intentional or rational. And so we get a glimpse of her view of experience, a view of her poetic madness, you know, this thing in her that just really comes through so strongly. And the same could be said of many, many letter writers.
In your book, Soulmates, you have a picture of a book on the front. What are the implications, or what's the message behind having that picture? If you chose a picture, I know sometimes authors don't get a chance to.
No, I had a say in this. I didn't find the picture. My agent did that, but I've thought about it, and I did have a hand in it. It's a picture of by Redon, the painter Redon, and it's a picture of a boat with a very bright yellow sail, and with apparently 2 people in the boat. They're hard to see. You have to get very close to see them, and I like that because I think that when we ordinarily think about relationships, we focus too much on the interpersonal dynamics and the personalities rather than on the mysteries. And this image of the sail is a very ancient one, you know, that things come into our lives as on the wind. Maybe you know Botticelli's paintings like the Birth of Venus.
Yes.
The wind is blowing Venus in. And I get that notion here too, that we are in a sailboat in a certain sense in relationships, and the winds are blowing.
Life's on the journey of life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Tom, for coming today and being with us today and in the future as we read Soulmates.
Well, thank you, Jack.
And thank you for joining us for a discussion with Thomas Moore.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.